All right, Oliver, this is episode 3. As you can see, the little opening there is a super fast forwarded section 2 of the lunar space station. So in this episode, I'm not going to show you the build as much as we're going to discuss the orbital mechanics of rendezvousing with another satellite in Kerbal orbit and then docking. So as always, we're going to pitch over 10 degrees using the stability assist and then waiting for our prograde circle to catch up, and then we will click on the prograde button, and then from there the rest of the way on up and into orbit we just control our gravity turn with our throttle, trying to maintain an acceleration rate that gives us about 100 meters a second every 10 degrees that we pitch over to the east. And so the module that we're sending up right now is our habitation module with docking ports, and it is going to connect underneath the command module. And as you can see, we're flying this huge, abnormally large, unrealistic fairing, as this thing is a little bit wide due to the docking port tunnels. But nonetheless, it is fairly light. It's not a heavy payload, so getting up into low Kerbin orbit is, like always, going to take roughly about 3,300 meters a second of delta V. And so in our first stage, we are going to lift ourselves up and out of the atmosphere as much as possible while starting to pitch over and accelerate parallel to the Kerbin surface so that we can achieve an orbital velocity. And as you also can see, I've loaded this up. I think there's about 8 Kerbal astronauts in the habitation module, and they're going to dock with Jebediah, who's currently in the command module. And our last kick, I was a little bit low. The gravity turn got ahead of me, so I had to add a lot of throttle to get our apoapsis a little bit higher in the atmosphere before we run out of fuel. As this fairing is really large, we need to get up to a high enough altitude to jettison the fairing so we can activate our second stage. So I just brought us up and out of the atmosphere completely. So we're fast forwarding here. And as soon as we get out of the atmosphere at 70 kilometers, we'll go ahead and jettison the fairing and activate, and actually coast on up to the apoapsis to activate our second stage, to bring us up into a orbital velocity. And bye-bye, you abnormally large fairing. So what I've done is, and what I normally do is, the object that I'm going to dock with, I speed up time and get it basically above the launch site. So by the time we get up into orbit, we're going to be, I don't know, about 1 clock position behind it. So if it's at 4 o'clock, we'll be at 5 o'clock. And once we achieve orbit here, we're going to use a maneuver node to plan our docking. So since the orbits are very close together, we don't need to be too far apart. So we're going to hit the prograde and raise our apoapsis so it meets the orbital altitude of our command module. And now you can see that we're not really going to be lined up, so we can grab the circle here and we can move this along our orbital path until we achieve the desired effect. The desired effect being lining up as close as possible with either the orange or magenta tabs, so that we have a separation of usually less than 10 kilometers, you're okay. But the closer you can get it, the better. So I think in this case we're about 2 kilometers, 3.9. We can mess with the prograde, we can mess with the location of the burn. So 2.7 kilometers. Then we're going to hit the maneuver tab, which is going to orient our spacecraft in the direction we're going to burn ahead of getting to that location. So once we get oriented, our ship oriented to the direction we're going to burn, we're going to speed up time so that we can get, and it's a very short duration burn, but we're going to get to the location of our burn, because location is just important as how much speed or velocity we're going to increase here. As you can see, we've got about 40 seconds to our burn location. We're already oriented in our burn direction, which is prograde, which is burning. We're going to be facing the direction we're flying because we want to increase our speed so that our apoapsis will rise on the opposite side of the planet. And so I'm going to use the shift key here and do a very delicate burn. We don't want to hit Z because we'll accelerate way past the speed that we want to accelerate. We're only going to speed up about 40 kilometers or so, or 40 meters a second. Not very much to raise our apoapsis. And now we left click, and that button can be hard to click when there's a lot of objects around it, so sometimes I reorient the screen. Okay, so we have an encounter. In that location, we're going to be 2.8 kilometers apart, and we're going to be traveling 55 meters a second, different in speed relative to each other. So what we're going to do is we're going to hit the retrograde button and then click on the screen until we get the target, which is our command module. So now that the speedometer is basically giving us the speed relative to each other, not relative to the planet, which is important. So now what we want to do is we're going to let the spaceship orient to the retrograde position to the target. And the idea behind this is we're going to be facing the exact direction that command module is moving, so that when we burn, we can cancel our speed out relative to each other. So this is always the first phase of docking. Kind of get it into close position, and now we're just going to burn until our velocity says 0 meters a second. And kind of goose it a little bit. Now we're going to face towards the target, hitting the target button. And once we're facing directly at the target, we're going to initiate another burn. And so since he's 3 kilometers away, we don't want to just go 5 meters a second. It'll take forever and a day to get there. So we're going to go ahead and give it a little bit of juice here. I'm using the thrusters to maneuver the prograde marker directly on top of our target marker so that we are flying more directly at him. So here we go. I'm going to get to about 30 meters a second here. So that we should cover that 2.6 kilometers in fairly short order. Now we want to hurry up and orient our spacecraft away from the target so that we can slow back down once we get there. We don't want to crash into our space station and send debris flying in all directions in orbit to later hit other spacecraft and create a chain reaction Kepler syndrome. Mostly we just don't want to undo the work we've already done, so we don't want to crash into our command module with our habitation module. So you can see I'm just manipulating the thruster very lightly so that we can get in a good proximity to each other, ultimately canceling our speed out relative to each other. We're going to set our target to the docking port of the command module and then orient ourselves towards that docking module. We're 31 kilometers away. And I'm just doing a little bit of housekeeping maneuvering, rolling to a particular orientation. This is more of a personal preference thing. It's something you don't have to do. For me, it makes it easier to dock. And then we're going to press the right bracket key and switch to the command module. And we're going to set the target to the docking port of the habitation module. And then we're going to, since the cupola module is the opposite side, we're going to hit the anti-target, which will orient our docking port towards the docking port of the habitation module. And we're going to switch back. So we're going to be using the J, I, K, L keys with our RCS to maneuver our prograde marker directly on the bullseye of the magenta target. And what that does is it lines us up directly so that both docking ports are directly lined up with each other. And then we're going to thrust forward with the H key and then thrust and reverse with the N key if we want to slow down for a gentle dock. But that's basically how we approach the vessel that we're going to dock. And that's our relative velocity to each other. We're still traveling around planet Kerbin at 2,300 meters a second, 2,250 really. We're at a little bit higher in orbit. And then you just want to use your RCS thrusters to keep that yellow prograde marker centered on your target. And it makes for very easy docking. Now we're docked. And we have 574 meters a second left in that little thruster there, but that is taking into account the huge size of the ship. So when we undock, you're going to see that our delta V in that thruster is much higher now that it's not pushing as much mass around. Look at that, 1,495 meters a second, which is way more than we need to deorbit. But we're going to go ahead and deorbit this, as we are going to need a bigger rocket motor to get this space station out to lunar orbit. So we're just going to back off using RCS thrusters, and we're going to switch our nav ball to orbit by clicking where it says orbit, and then we're going to conduct a burn to slow our orbital velocity in the retrograde direction. You can see our periapsis is down to negative 33, meaning it's going to intersect the ground of planet Kerbin. And you can see it's still moving away from us. And there you have it. This is our space station almost fully assembled. So we're going to orient it facing upwards. You can see the 4 docking ports. I'm just doing a little housekeeping here. Oh, looks like I have cap locks on. This will give us a little bit of a different picture in the map screen. Got a habitation module. Those are 4-person habitation modules, and then we're using a fairing to create that section, to create the illusion that there's habitable space in there for our Kerbal knots. All right, we're about done here. So in episode 4, we're going to be launching and docking the final module and sending it out to the moon.